What does it mean? Oh, what does it mean? How are the union and the socialist mean? Everything I can need, oh, I need, oh, I need, oh, I need, oh, the workers need. Oh, workers need. Oh, workers need. Oh, workers need. Oh, workers need. Hey folks, welcome back to another Workers Lit interview. Pretty excited. We have returning guest that came on. We had a different name. We were Socialist Shelf. Now we're Workers Lit, but let's say returning guest. But someone I didn't get the pleasure to meet. Andy Boyd, playwright, and yeah, friend of the pod. Andy, welcome back on the show.
I'm so glad to be back. Feels like no time has passed.
Yes, yes, and yet so much has happened.
Oh, yeah.
uh, um, Andy, you have written a play that we are here to talk about today. Last time we talked about
Occupy Prescott, we talked about.
Occupy Prescott was the play
Yeah,
last time,
yeah.
and that was a blast. This time we've got 3 scenes in the life of a Trotskyist. And yeah, so tell us about this play. Tell us what's going on with it. I just read it yesterday, and I really enjoyed it. Now I just want to see it staged, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. I would love to see another production at some point. So this is a play, like the kind of seed of this play goes back a long time to when I was in college, and I took Louis Manann's class on art and thought in the Cold War. And it was interesting reading, we read a bunch of these figures, these like important intellectuals who were like creating this kind of interesting, kind of like humanistic brand of Marxism in the United States that I had really not heard about much before. And then you would like look up what these guys were doing 30 years later, and they're like basically like the shock troops of the Reagan Revolution, like, and it happens really quick. These are guys who kind of came of age in the 30s, which is, a very radical time in the United States. And by the late 40s or early 50s, I think it was, gosh, I'm gonna forget which magazine this was, but one of the like big magazines like hosted a symposium. It might have been Partisan Review, basically saying like, is the American project over, overall good or bad? Like upvote, downvote
Mm,
American capitalism. And only one of the people who responded said it wasn't. This was, not even 20 years later, and most of these figures have given up on any kind of transformative project in the United States. And, some of them kind of stayed like, liberals, and some of them became arch conservatives. But obviously, the more dramatic turn is the more interesting. So I kind of invented this character from this kind of same milieu, and then kind of snapshotted 3 different moments in this character's life. And so we see him in the 1930s as a student radical at City College, um, which I don't know. I teach at Hunter College, so people might not know that City College. That's the sort of the lesser boys' school to what was then the women's college of Hunter College. But if people called City College, the working class Harvard or the Jewish Harvard, which
mm.
were kind of interchangeable at the time. And so this scene kind of takes place in one of these infamous like debating circles, which were informal. It's funny when people from this group reminisce about their City College days, they never mention like a professor that influenced them. They never mention like a class that they took. It's always these like, kind of endless debates in the cafeteria, and there's even like a sort of like political cartoon from the campus newspaper that shows like, you know a typical debate in the City College cafeteria, and it's guys just beating the shit out of each other, which I think is like a metaphor. I think it's like, a comic exaggeration, but like
Sure.
these debates were notoriously intense, and
They would have
kind
loved
of
Twitter. They would have loved Twitter so
they would
much.
have loved Twitter. Yeah, for sure. Irving Howe would have loved Twitter. So, but yeah, but they sort of sharpened their arguments, and the group that became the most important group um, were the Trotskyists. And there were like a few like Bukharinites, but basically like the anti-Stalinist Marxists
Right.
were the groups that went on to found Dissent and Partisan Review and Commentary and all of these important publications that like I
Yeah,
have
I'm thinking
one.
of like Norman Podhoretz, right? Like is the guy that comes to mind when I think
Yeah,
of
he's sort
these.
of second. He's like second generation in this
Okay,
group. Yeah,
gotcha.
but yeah, Norman Potter is for sure is like kind of swimming in the pool that was dug by this earlier generation, if that metaphor makes any sense. But then in the second scene, I show our hero Lev kind of getting into it with this younger black student radical over what initially is just a debate about whether he can get an extension, but becomes about a much bigger sort of topic of like Lev's place within the student movement.
And
Um,
that's the second scene. That's in the 60s, right? The late
yeah,
60s.
the second scene is in the 60s, and it's intentionally kind of right before the campus rebellions at Columbia. I did a lot of research on the campus rebellions at Columbia, and basically decided like they were too complicated and interesting to like put all that exposition in there. So what I did was sort of like move the timeline up a little bit and then kind of wrote a two-character scene in which the tensions of that uprising were like already present.
I
So
think
the
that's
ways that,
smart because I feel like when you get into the campus rebellions, it gets tough not to have way more people on stage and a lot
for
more going
sure.
on. Maybe we should say the first campus rebellions at Columbia because there's also that extra context that we now
Oh
have,
yes.
from recent
Oh yeah.
history,
Okay, I
which
have
makes it interesting.
this is a little bit of a tangent, but I went to Columbia for grad school, and there's a great and I was involved. I wasn't part of the what do you call it? I wasn't eligible to be in the union, but I was like, very supportive of the union.
Yeah.
Because I had the wrong kind of campus job, whatever. And there was a meeting that a bunch of us went to that was like a celebration of 50 years since the campus rebellion. What have we learned? And some like fucking like vice provost or something was like speaking on the panel because he'd been a student during that time. And I want to say at one point we stood up and we started singing Solidarity Forever. And he sort of lit up and he was like, "Oh yes, this I like this song. I remember this good old ditty from back in the day." And then we like handed him a list of demands from the union, and his face kind of fell. So it was this great moment of like, yeah, Columbia's fine with like commemorating and like putting on symposia about the campus rebellion that happened 50 years ago, but then they're going to brutally suppress the campus rebellions that are happening now.
Yeah, the classic line that like modern liberals love or hate every war except the last one and love every civil rights movement except the current one.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm kind of like, I mean, not to get too deep into my anxieties that keep me up at night, but like I'm kind of like waiting for the moment when like the Democratic Party fully flips on trans people because it
Mhm.
feels like that must be. I mean, it's kind of incredible that it hasn't happened yet, and that they're still like broadly pretty supportive. But then like you look at what's happening in the UK, and it's like, I mean, certainly they were never as supportive as the Democrats are now, but like Keir Starmer's Labour Party has become like a vociferously
Yes.
anti-trans party in a way that's just like, oh, so there's no one that trans people can vote for in the UK who's even remotely concerned with their rights
Yeah.
and liberties. So, very depressing, but hopefully that doesn't happen here. And then the third scene takes place in 1980 when Lev has become the sort of like um, you know, doyen of like a conservative version of the Partisan Review or whatever.
Yeah, he's doing
Um,
like think tank stuff, right?
he's
They
doing
they were
think
like
tank stuff.
Reagan reads your magazine. He says, "Oh well, no, Nancy reads it to
Yeah, Nancy. Yeah,
him."
yes. Yeah, I thought that was funny. And and then he kind of brings one of his like old city college friends back to kind of reminisce, and they have this conversation that starts out awkward and doesn't get any better. So yeah, that's the three scenes. And it was kind of an interesting project for me to like for it to be like inspired by history, but like I could do little things like saying Nancy reads it to him, which is based on nothing. I mean, it's a fictional magazine, so like, who cares?
Sounds real though. Sounds
It
real.
sounds weird. It sounds like a guy, I don't think of Reagan as being a particularly big reader, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But then, yeah, sort of like being able to weave in and out of the real historical record as I wanted was a lot of fun with this one. And I'm like very concerned about like all of the date, like each of the three scenes starts with a specific date and year because I had to be like each. Well, the second one not so much, but the first and third are all pegged to like actual major historical events, which maybe it's too much of a spoiler alert to say what those are, but like I did I'm neurotic enough that I was like, okay, I have to make sure that like if they mention the weather, it's the accurate weather for that
Right.
day. So, but I also was like, I can have these characters make arguments that their real life counterparts wouldn't necessarily have exactly made. Oh, this pissed me off. We did like a talk back, and this is so petty, but we did a talk back, and somebody was like, "Oh, I don't think I think the way they talk about racism in the second scene like isn't how they would have talked about racism in the '60s. Like the idea of like an institution being racist, they wouldn't have said that." And then I like looked at like what Stokely Carmichael said at the Columbia uprisings, and he's like absolutely calling Columbia racist as an institution, and
Yeah.
white supremacist, using the phrase white supremacist as well. So I don't know. It's maybe as it's just this is my right as a playwright and not a historian, but like the things that I've gotten called out for being historically inaccurate that then I've spent way too much time proving are not historically inaccurate just for my own, I don't know, edification and waste of time. It's fun to be able to do. It's fun, but like I don't know. I wanted people to come away with like a truthful sense of the times,
Right.
even if not every detail is, exactly historically, perfect.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is about I mean, I think a lot of writing, I mean, we call it historical fiction, is about grounding someone in what it felt like then and taking those lessons from them and seeing how they can kind of apply and feel now. I guess I'm
Yeah.
curious, what is there was there something that made you particularly interested in these figures, this type of guy who was a radical who ended up becoming a conservative? I mean, I know you
Yeah.
just cited your own kind of experience with someone that maybe didn't become a conservative but became, well, let's say a boring liberal or like an institutionalist, like with your
Yeah.
own experience at Columbia. But what made you interested in this type of figure? Because this definitely is a type of guy, and I would say like aside from even the neoconservative movement, this is also a type of person that a lot of us know, right? I
Yeah.
I, I
Yeah.
can say a lot of maybe they didn't call themselves a Trotskyist, maybe they did, but they were to some extent radical. There's how many
Yeah.
boomers do we know that were marching against the Vietnam War, for instance?
Yeah.
This is another generation later, but how many boomers do we know marched against the Vietnam War, part of the hippie movement, all this, and then became boring suburbanites.
Yeah.
So that like spoke to me in a way that I think we can all relate to. But what made you want to talk about this particular intellectual strain, this type of guy, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. Um, I don't know. I was definitely seeing it all around me, and not just with older people. I mean, I was seeing it around me with like other people in DSA, and
Yeah, yeah,
and like I can confess that like I've certainly become. I don't think I've really gone to the right, but I've certainly become less active as I don't know. My job has taken up more of my life, and I have a kid
sure.
now, and trying to find some time to write plays, and it's hard. But I can think of one friend in particular who was like the kind of person who like whenever you talk to her, she was like absolutely sure that she was right, and she was like she was a Trotskyist actually, um, and I remember having this like conversation, like really intense conversation with her, where she was like really insisting that like it was important that we recognize that the rise of capitalism was like a step forward for the human race, like this sort of
Hmm.
like stage theory argument. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe for some people, but like it wasn't for Africa, it wasn't for South America, it wasn't for North America, like it wasn't for most places that it touched. And I think Marx, I don't know, I think Marx would agree with me, maybe not, but the point was that like she was like so sure that she was right, and then like I guess that's sort of like a weird ultra. I don't know. I don't even know what that position was, but
It's highly orthodox, let's put it that way.
yeah,
That's an
highly.
extremely, like, inflexible way of looking at things.
Yeah, okay. So like sort of orthodox Marxist is like the starting point. And then like 6 months later, she was being like, I actually think we need to all be reading Edward Bernstein. And I was like, nobody reads Edward Bernstein. Like only read Edward Bernstein to know specifically what Rosa was dunking on about him. And then she like sort of became like a sort of social democrat and it was like weird to like watch her be. Then there was never, like there isn't with Lev, there was never a kind of acknowledgement of, oh, I was wrong then, and now I found out the truth. It was just like, here's what it is, and if you don't agree with me, you're an idiot. And then 6 months later, it was like a totally different ideology, and if you don't agree with me now, you're an idiot. And so that was a sort of type of person that I found very interesting. But I think also like I don't know, I think kind of connected to I think sometimes when I describe this play, it's helpful for me to mention Christopher Hitchens and be
Yeah,
like, it's a character kind of like he's like this sort of like, argumentative but brilliant jerk who then like starts on the left and like veers to the right. It's, what that's a person that's more contemporary that people know. But like, I wouldn't really, I wasn't inspired by Hitchens because the thing that inspired me about the New York Intellectuals, which is the group that I'm sort of like you know, uh, parodying, I guess, here, is the fact that they were so literary, that like they cared so much about Marx and they cared so much about T.S. Eliot. And, Eliot's not my guy particularly, but like I love that idea of like you could try to make both of those things your like all consuming passion and you could try um, to make them make sense with each other. You could try to do, Marxist readings of the modernist poets that like wouldn't then just conclude that the modernist poets were bourgeois individualists who weren't worth reading, Um, and so, ever since I kind of first learned about the New York intellectuals, I was interested in that idea that like, and that this happened like, kind of throughout a lot of their lives. Like a lot of them continued to be really interested in literature. And like, I mean, if you read like, I don't know, like World of Our Fathers by Irving Howe, which is like from the 70s or maybe even 80s. So like pretty late in his career, like his attention to like not just the Yiddish theater, but like specific Yiddish plays and kind of analyzing what happens in the plays and like why this play was important, why this playwright was important. And I think that's amazing. I think that's amazing for somebody who's like a political, primarily like a sort of political theorist. I mean, I don't know, also a literary critic. But yeah, I like that these guys felt like they could jump between these different modes so fluidly and not be, I was a sociology undergraduate and then I got a sociology PhD and now I teach sociology and I'm a sociologist, like that kind of
right.
mode of like, that's kind of like not really being an intellectual. Like, um, some people have said that the New York intellectuals are the only intellectuals America has ever produced, which I think is putting it a little bit extremely, but I know what they mean because it's that sense of people, yeah, they had a formal education, some of them more than others. Um, but that wasn't where they were getting their ideas primarily. They were getting their ideas from, avant-garde literature and from, uh, translated, Marxist literature, and they knew everything and they'd read everything,
And I think
and
there's you identify an interesting thing that really was going on in this period, especially in this first scene where you have this clash between these people, these New York intellectuals who are much more guys like Lev who are much more fluid. They're much more, I mean, I'll say like they're more free thinking or whatever. And he's clashing with this person who's a kind of a Communist Party stalwart who is like,
yeah,
here is the
yeah,
line. A very smart person, to be clear, not someone who's not capable of free thought, but somebody who is like, here's the line. I'm going to defend it. This is what Browder said this week. Um, you know,
yeah,
um, and that conversation they have is very interesting. And,
thanks,
uh,
yeah,
and and I think that's interesting that in the backdrop you have a janitor who is like, "Call me when y'all are gonna actually help somebody."
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
um, and and he's and then they're like leaving shit out that he's got to clean up, and there is
uh-huh,
definitely something to that too. Um,
yeah,
And I think that there is a through line of like that janitor in the first scene. In the second thing, you have this student who's talking about like, the lived experience of if not
Yeah,
socialism, then an embryonic socialism of people helping each other out,
yes,
doing mutual
yes,
aid. And he's like, oh well, you don't have to do that, you just have to like read these books that I'm giving you, that's all white people.
yeah, yeah,
You have this through line of people wanting to do something, and that kind of being looked down upon or at least seen as
sure,
secondary. And I think
yeah,
that's like an interesting thing to frame it up too. I mean, it even acknowledges how many working class people were reading this literature.
yeah.
That doesn't make the literature not important. If it wasn't, then I would certainly be incredibly hypocritical as like everything that I do. But it is interesting to acknowledge that like dichotomy between the intellectual, quote unquote, and the working class.
There's yeah, yeah, for sure. And in the third scene, when his friend Daniel comes back to his office, um, and it's clearly the nicest office he's ever been in. But it's important that he's just retired from being a teacher. So you see kind of throughout like these these working class jobs, and Curtis is working other jobs in the second scene, and the sort of like inability of Lev to like acknowledge that like this person whose actual class position is a wage laborer, may have something to teach him about
Right.
socialism. Um, yeah. Even though he does, I mean, Lev does this like disgusting thing in the beginning of the second scene where he's like kind of trying to be like, I'm like you, we're the same.
Yes.
I'm a
Yes, to
10
this
years,
young black student who he ends up
yeah,
telling saying that there's never been a good black artist because black people have been too oppressed to make good literature.
yeah,
Um,
which is
like
also
I
like
I
a,
love that being framed that way because it's like making such a condescending argument in a way that sounds
yeah,
like pseudo progressive, but it
yeah,
could only sound that way to someone so far up their own ass in like
right,
pseudo intellectualism. Anybody else would be able to be like, "What are you talking about, man?" And but it's a real
right,
type of guy. Like you are on to a type of guy here. I've said that a few times,
yeah,
but it is interesting.
yeah.
Like I think we've all
That's actually the subtitle, a play about a type of guy.
really could be like, yeah, this is a yeah, a sort of dude.
Yeah,
I think one more thing that I think is interesting to put up, and I'm kind of trying to dance around. Typically on this podcast we're not worried about spoilers, but for this is something that I would love people to go get and read. We're not really doing we're not really doing like an episode summary. We're not doing
uh-huh.
like a summary episode. We're doing an interview here. But one thing I wanted to note was I think it's interesting in the last scene the way Les getting called out, the way you identify how he says that he's never really changed his mind, the way he thinks that, oh, I've been correct the whole time, is he basically reframes his whole politics around anti-Stalinism, which I think
Yes,
is interesting. And he's like, oh, well, it's just like because the EPA is Stalinist, right? That's why I'm a conservative now and I was a Trotskyist then. It's the same thing. I think
yeah,
that is like I think that's like, there's definitely like a bunch of different interesting like turns of phrase and moments that happen in this. There are a bunch of just little details that I like, especially in such a short play, like Trotskyist versus Trotskyite, that being used as a thing
yes,
that needles
that's a
people
running
back and
joke.
forth. All kinds of little things like that that I think are that like kind of give it, beyond just the level of, oh, this being like sort of an interesting work to wrestle with a type of guy. It also just makes it feel lived in a way that I like.
And one thing that I like about this scene is when he has his kind of ridiculous, like the first argument of like, oh, communism has like led to all this like suffering, and that's, I think that's sort of unfortunately true in many cases. But like the interesting argument for me, and I think the sort of parallel argument to the like black people can't produce great literature because they're too oppressed, is the argument of like, it's I like he loves kind of taking an argument to its craziest extreme. He would have
Right.
loved Twitter. But like the one about basically any milquetoast liberalism is Stalinism waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And he says this is page one Trotsky, this is Lenin on his deathbed. Fuck, this is Kafka's great theme.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy, any bureaucracy eventually comes to exist solely to perpetuate its own existence. And I think that there's still something of the 30s version of him that's like, yeah, we can cite Trotsky, we can cite Lenin, but like if I can get Kafka on my side, then like I'm
Yeah,
really fucking shit up, you know?
then we're cooking.
Then we're cooking
Uh,
with gas, yeah.
we had a running joke that I think most of it got cut from the episode because it didn't flow with the theme of it. But we were on our Kafka episode we did this summer. We had a running
Mm,
joke of Kafka would have been my friend, and this feels like
yeah.
shockingly like it fits with that like running joke we had in there. Like, yeah, Kafka, not only would he agree with me, he would have hung out with me.
Yeah.
It
Even
is-
though nobody else wants to, Kafka would have partied
yes.
down.
Yeah, so the one more thing I wanted to ask about is something that gets referenced multiple times in the play is
Yeah.
the story of Jacob wrestling with God.
Yes.
Now, as someone named Jacob, I'm quite familiar with that story of, Jacob gets visited by an angel or God or some incarnation of the divine. They
Hmm.
wrestle, and because Jacob gets his hip knocked out of its socket, and then Jacob demands he gets blessed, and he gets blessed, and the name Israel is bestowed upon him, and he says he'll
Yeah.
be the father of a nation. Um, what made you interested in putting this in the story? I mean, it's interesting how Lev references it multiple times in kind of different ways, but
Yeah,
he sort
for
of
sure.
thinks he's saying the same thing. I would love if
Yeah.
you could speak to that because that's obviously like an intentional through line here.
Yeah. I think that it kind of has to do with like the idea of like struggle as like an inherent good, which you don't really see on the left much anymore, but you certainly saw on the sort of old left,
Sure.
like, my favorite Woody Guthrie album is just called Struggle, and
Right.
it's got like Pretty Boy Floyd on it and stuff like that. Which is an interesting notion of struggle. I don't know, propaganda of the deed, maybe, but like that kind of thing of like working hard, and also the idea of work, the idea of the sort of value of work. That like if you look at these old, Communist Party like posters or these like WPA artists or something, there's this sort of like valorization of like the working class as like a sort of like beautiful, morally superior type of person, like the people that like work the land or
Right.
work in the factories, have a sort of like, a sort of morally shiny. And I wrote a previous play that was about Diego Rivera painting the Detroit industry murals. And one of the things I found out doing research for that was that like Reagan had actually used those murals in some of his campaign ads. And sort of like
Right.
panned over the murals, being like, "This is, the great American factory we're going to bring back," and stuff like that. And I don't know, it sort of struck me that like a lot of these ideas we had about work and about sort of like and about work and the work's relationship to struggle, like union struggle or political struggle, or work and its relationship to masculinity, because there are women in the Detroit industry murals, but those are not the people that we really remember in those murals
Right.
when you think about them. Um, just yeah, seems sort of like infinitely movable. And I sort of felt like a lot of those ideas had been taken over by the right in like sometimes extraordinarily clumsy ways, but I think Trump tries to do this sort of like pro-workerist thing from time to time, and it seems to work for a significant percentage of unionized workers. Um, and then the way that like an idea like struggle, which means like against your bosses, can then sort of get like turned into just like, oh, actually working is great, and you should maybe take that job where you have a mandatory overtime, have mandatory overtime built into your schedule or whatever, or just kind of the like bland, this is sort of 5 years old at this point, but the kind of like Atlantic magazine article idea of like grit, like being really important, and that like you had to you had to face up against something. You had to kind of fight for your right to sort of exist, I guess. I don't know. There's also there's also I think an aspect of this, if I can get a little Freudian for a moment,
Yeah, go for
that's
it.
like a sort of killing the father figure. The only thing that Lev says about his parents is that like he moved out and they were upset and they lived. You know, he doesn't have a close relationship with his parents. He doesn't have children himself. Um, but I get the sense that this image appeals to him, partially as like a um, casting off a certain type of kind of, first generation or old world sensibility. He's, this character is Jewish, but he's not really religious. He sort of defensively, asserts his Jewishness at one point, but it's not really that important. It's important, if at all, as a kind of like source of metaphors and images, and this is like the favorite one that he comes back to. And I think that that's like something that this generation like often had, was like a sense of, it's not your duty necessarily to like, keep kosher, but it's certainly your duty to like fight and struggle and not make your parents trip across the Atlantic a waste, you know?
Right, right.
Um, there's I'm skeptical of the Protestant work ethic. I grew up around Protestants, and we didn't seem like a particularly hardworking bunch. But I think the like Jewish immigrant work ethic, at least in this specific circumstance of New York 1930s, I mean, the historical record is pretty clear that there was something going on there.
Definitely. And yeah, could you tell us, I know this play has already been produced. Could you
It
tell us about the
has.
productions that have happened already? And maybe you can inform anyone who's listening who would love to produce it in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. For you can buy copies of it from 1319 Press, and I think they'll direct you to how to apply for rights. But
And
it was
we
it,
will link that into the show notes as well.
thank you. It was a long process. I was first kind of talking with a director named Kim Kerfoot, who is a wonderful guy, wonderful artist. But he was here on a student visa, and his visa ran out, and he had to go back to South Africa. So then I I uh, I emailed Haleh Roshan, and I was basically like, "Are there any directors with good politics? I can't seem to find them." And she was like, "Yeah," and gave me a list, and on that list was Jake Beckard, and basically sent a play to Jake cold and was like, "Hey, I would love to know your thoughts on this," um, and he liked the play and he responded to it, and we talked to the tank, and then we didn't hear back for a while, and then they were sort of like, hey, do you want to be in our core season and have like a 3 week run? And we were like, yeah, for sure we do. So we did like a huge like fundraising campaign uh, to raise, not that much money, but like it takes some money to do a 5 character play, even with
Right.
like minimal tech and stuff. Um, and yeah, we did the play. It opened in February 2024 at the Tank, and we had an amazing cast. I was super happy with everybody in the cast. I'll just single out Jeff Gonzalez, who played Lev, is an amazing actor, and was just like, that possibly apocryphal Nicolas Cage quote where he says, "There is no top to human emotion."
Yeah.
I feel like Jeff comes from that school of acting where it was just like, Jeff, it's just rehearsal. Like you don't have to go. It doesn't have to be 11 out of
Unleash the
10.
full power. Yeah.
Yeah. But he did, and he was just, he was ferocious, and he understood, and I think he understood because I think Jake directed him to understand, um, that this was a play not about ideas, but about these like duos of men uh, beating the shit out of each other with words. That
Hmm.
it's like it's if you just keep your eye on asserting dominance is for some reason Lev's commanding passion in life, then like you're gonna do fine and look up the references and know what you're talking about. But like primarily like he's trying to win, even when he's reminiscing with his dear old friend who he hasn't seen in years, he's still trying to win. He's still trying to like impress the other person and make him leave being like, wow, that Lev, he sure is smart. There's a quote. Okay, there's a quote that I include in my notes at the beginning of the play by Vivian Gornick, who Vivian Gornick spoke at Hunter a couple weeks ago, and I was like, students, you need to like I can't require this because like it's not at all relevant to what I teach, but like you really should go see Vivian Gornick. And they were like,
Yeah.
we don't know who that is, and we're not going to. And but we're
Damn.
fine. Okay, so this quote, she says, and she's talking about the New York intellectuals in this point. She says these men were marked by a ferocious devotion to the kind of argument during which you determined not on besting your opponent but annihilating him. You know, I think that's just like yeah, that's kind of the whole play. And Jake really got that. Jake really understood that like this was a boxing match. These were three. He would joke that it could be called 3 rounds in the life of a Trotskyist because it
Yeah, that's
really
good.
is. It's they're in as with the kind of wrestling with the angel image. They are constantly in struggle with each other. It's almost like a sort of like Maoist struggle session or something,
A
except for
dialectic,
that.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then also I think that I think Jake had a great way of like not of like kind of doing like I was saying earlier, like kind of doing the both things of it all of like taking the literature stuff and the history stuff seriously and being like we do need to understand what they're saying here and we need to like bring that across to an audience and also sometimes coming to me and saying like hey this stuff it's interesting but I don't know that it's really moving the scene forward and
Sure.
that was super useful to have. But yeah, he just understood that we needed to like kind of play the high and low of it, both at the same time, which was super helpful.
Fantastic. Well,
Now he's in law school.
yeah,
I know.
I guess that's fitting, yeah. I'm just thinking of you made the Nick Cage reference. I'm imagining Nick Cage as Lev and cracking up right
Hey, call me
now.
Nick. We haven't sold the film rights.
Yeah, him just doing the really dramatic, just saying like the EPA is Stalinist. Yeah, the way
Yeah,
he does.
yeah.
I can't
I
do a Nick
mean,
Cage impression. I,
they
we
made
need
some. Yeah.
Lenore for that.
Hmm.
Lenore's the impressionist on the podcast.
Oh,
But
okay. I see.
but well, my final question here is you've done this. We're hoping to get more productions of this if possible. But
Let's do
uh,
it.
are you willing to let folks know what you're working on right now?
Yeah. I have a play that I'm trying to get into a theater, which is called Pentheus, which is about it's I don't like to call it an adaptation of the Bacchae because I don't think that's quite accurate, but it's a play that's sort of in conversation with the Bacchae from the point of view of King Pentheus, who's the sort of most hateable character in Greek tragedy. For those of you who haven't read the play, like basically Dionysus comes to Thebes and it's like, "Hey, I'm here and we're gonna party and we're gonna drink a bunch of wine and we're gonna, experiment with gender and it's gonna be fun." And then Pentheus is like, "No, the fuck you're not. What the fuck are you talking about?" But then later, um, Dionysus has to like Dionysus basically like convinces Pentheus to come with him to the kind of like mountain retreat where his like closest uh, cadre of women worshippers live, so that they can kill him. And the way that he convinces Pentheus to do this is by being like, "Oh, you couldn't go up there because like there's no men allowed, and so if you go up there, they'll kill you. But what if you dress as a girl?" And Pentheus
Mm.
is like, "I don't know about that" for 1 second, and then is pretty immediately like, "All right, I'll do it," which is just like I forget who said this, but I read in some trans book that like I think it was yeah, I think it was in Whipping Girl that like most cis people wouldn't spend a day presenting as the opposite gender for $1 million. Um, which may be an exaggeration, but whatever. I think there's some truth to that. I think like cis people are like really fucking cis, and that's fine. So I always thought that was interesting, and like the and there's some suggestion that like Pentheus is being like enchanted by Dionysus or whatever, and I don't buy that. I just think that Pentheus is an egg. And so I've written a play kind of from the point of view of Pentheus, where like, I'm kind of taking the story from before Dionysus gets there and going up to, you know, it's a tragedy, Pentheus's death, and kind of exploring the like the ways that somebody like Pentheus can go back and forth between being like, I want to be a girl so bad, and then also being like, what's all this faggy shit that I see in my city, you
Right.
know? Um,
Exactly.
and you know, yeah, I was talking with a because some people have been critical of the play as it currently exists because they felt like the way that I was portraying Pentheus was, I don't know, not like the best look for our community or something. But I think it's like important to remember that like in my play, Pentheus is like a closeted trans person, and that like I don't know, we used to know this. Like closeted people can be really dangerous. You know,
Oh
closeted
yeah.
people can be some of the most dangerous people around because that like internalized self-hatred can get like re-externalized onto other people very easily. So I'm interested in writing this character. I mean, sort of in some way similar to Lev. Like interested in writing a character where I'm like, I think this character has good qualities and bad qualities. Like the qualities that you think are good and the qualities that you think are bad will probably be totally different based on what your value system is. But what I'm not interested in doing is like putting this character on trial and like telling you what to think about them. You know?
Yeah,
Um,
I think I think that's important, and I think even in tough times, it's the queer community shouldn't have to perform sainthood for every member of the community,
yes.
especially closeted members of the community engaging in dangerous behavior that history shows us leads to dangerous behavior that those of
Yeah.
us in the community, or just those of us that are paying attention, can see
Yeah.
that shows up in their real life. So I get it that I have to quote one of the canonical tweets. I can't support all women. Some of y'all are stupid.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
Well, great. This play here is three scenes in the life of a Trotskyist. We will link in the show notes how you can get your copy. Check it out. We highly recommend. There is stuff in this play that we've left ambiguous because we want you to go read it. We want you to go read it, and it's worth doing. So Andy, we are very thankful to have had you back on Workers Lit. And yeah, is there anything else you want to plug before we hop off here?
Yeah, 1319 Press also has my play Os Confederados, which is about a neo-Confederate colony in Brazil. I think that's a fun one as well, though it has fewer, Marxist theory jokes. Um, yeah, and other than that, you can follow me on Instagram if you want. I'm sort of in a, I don't know. As I mentioned, I have a young child, so I'm in a little bit of a hibernating phase. But hopefully I'll have more stuff coming out at some point in the future.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you, Andy. You have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Pages upon pages, words of wisdom from other workers' brow. Got my nose to the spine, nose soaking up all the wisdom of they will allow. The workers' tongue and stories, how we want to know every right we enjoy. Away from the lights, away from the noise, we can rebuild everything they destroy. Workers need a workers' power of the union and the socialist dream. Everything I can get, oh I need, oh I need, oh I need, oh the workers need. The more I get, oh the more I need. Head in the books, so my mind is free. Driving in with everyone in mind. On my mind, no rally of all kinds. Cross the class, so we share and we show. How we win, knowing how we know. No, but when we're together, we're tired of what we need and need grow. What we need, oh, what the